Hey, welcome back to Liam Locke Gaming. I'm Liam Locke, and we're back in the Flight Simulator X Steam Edition Flight Simulator. And yes, it has been a little while. I took a break over the holidays, but now we're back in probably a little bit more of an extended break, primarily because I was having some challenges with the simulator and some of the configurations. Started looking at some of the frame rates that I was getting inside the simulator, and well, they're slowing down at times, and it's affecting some of the quality of the graphics presentation. You see some jitterness, whether I'm taxiing the plane or some of the other equipment running along the runway. And I've been trying to get that number up to make it a smoother flight. I don't think I've quite got it 100% ironed out, but enough time had gone by. It was time to record another video. Plus, I've added some additional add-ons to the simulator. Specifically, this beauty right here in front of you, the Boeing 747-800. This is the passenger intercontinental plane, and well, we're not going to be flying an intercontinental flight today. We're going to be doing a short haul flight from Dulles International Airport to JFK in New York. A very short flight for this particular aircraft. But I wanted to try out this plane, and the other add-on that I added on, you may have seen in some of my videos where as I'm navigating around the cockpit, sometimes the camera wants to jump all the way back around, and it's just really distracting when that happens. So there's another add-on that's been out there for a long time called EZdok, or the Easy Camera add-on. We put that into the simulator, and that seems to be working pretty well, and I really like the smooth transitions that it not only brings to Flight Simulator, but the fact that it also primarily corrects that jumpiness that you had when you were trying to move about the cockpit using the keyboard and the mouse. So I think I've got that working now, and what's really cool about it is you can set up a whole bunch of additional cameras, transition between them, including cameras at almost any place in the world. So take, for example, this camera here. This is looking down. You see my plane down there on the tarmac and the runway that we may be taking off from. But this is just cool that you can stick a camera somewhere in the world to monitor your takeoff or your landing or other flights, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So I think this is a really cool add-on. And then the other one, which I think is a nice touch, but can be a little bit distracting, is the real world simulation of how you might bounce around in a cockpit as you're flying the aircraft or taxiing on the runway. I think that adds certainly some realism to the look and feel of what it might be like to be in the cockpit of a plane as you're flying, no doubt. But when it comes to interacting with the controls and your viewpoint is bouncing all over the place, that gets really challenging to do. So I've dialed that back just a little bit, and I've also set up some instrumentation cameras which don't fluctuate as much. It makes it a little easier to work with, and you might pick up on that as we start to navigate around the cockpit. But anyways, I don't want to delay this video too much. I am going to go through the cold and dark startup for this aircraft, only because it is a little bit new. It's only slightly different from the 747-400. Not a whole lot has changed, a couple things. Plus, this plane, the 800, comes with the electronic flight bag, which is like a PDA next to the captain and the first officer, and I think that's really cool, and I haven't played with that yet, so I'm not going to spend any time talking about that. I've got my cold and dark startup checklist for this plane, and we are going to go ahead and get started with that. So in the cold and dark state, we are going to use GSX today. One thing we want to check, and one thing that I also like about this particular aircraft, when you put it in cold and dark state, is it automatically connects up ground power and the air conditioning unit, which is good because we need that, and that prevents us from having to start up the APU right away. And if we just take a quick look outside, again, here's one of those new cameras from EZdok. If we go outside, notice here we're down on the ground beside the aircraft. I love the realism that you now get from having these additional cameras. So if I'm standing on the ground, you get a better feel for the size of this particular aircraft. And right here in front of us, we can confirm that we absolutely have external power connected up to the aircraft. We've got some wheel chocks in place. And we can even spin around here and take a look under the aircraft and see that the air conditioning unit, right, has also been brought up. It's sitting back over here, just behind, and I can walk you. We can move about and actually see this. So here's the air conditioning unit that's been brought, connected up to the aircraft. So that's going to be providing conditioned air into the cabin. So I don't need the APU on or the bleed air going right away, and I can delay that part of the startup procedure. Now, one thing that Cold and Dark kind of does, and this is kind of unusual, is notice that the turbofans are actually rotating. When the plane first starts up, its engines are running. You go into Cold and Dark, and everything kind of shuts down. But it's weird that this rotation kind of lingers, and it almost will linger indefinitely. I haven't seen it stop yet, but we're not too concerned about that. Let's go back up into the cockpit. We know we've got external power and air conditioning attached, and we're going to start working through our checklist. So we already have the jetway connected. We've confirmed those settings, wheel chocks, air conditioning, power connection. So we want to go right to the overhead console and go ahead and get our battery turned on. And we'll see that parts of the aircraft start their initialization. We can also see from the instrument panel in the overhead that the external power is connected. We have the avail lights on external power 1 and external power 2. After turning the battery on, we want to set the standby power control to auto. And you'll see some additional lighting come on inside the cockpit. You'll hear some additional noises as that becomes available. And then from here, while we're on while we're on the battery power, we want to make sure that some things are turned off. So we kind of spot check our hydraulic demand pumps. They're down here. They're all in the off position. We don't want them drawing power yet. We also want to take a look at the windshield wipers. Make sure they're both in the off position. Drop down and check the alternate flaps configuration. So here's the alternate flaps, retract and extract control. It's not armed, so it's not drawing electrical power. Confirm that our landing gear is in a down position and the lever is in the down position. And you can see here on the ECAS page that also indicates gear down, so that's good. We want to look at the flap position. So if we look down here just a little bit, here's the flap lever. We see it's in flaps up, and we can confirm that by looking here at the ECAS and seeing that the flaps are in fact in the up position. So both the control and the ECAS agree with one another. And these X's just indicate that these left side flaps here are not fully initialized yet. All we're concerned about is that this indicator here on the right is in the up position and matches the control arm. So that is fine. Back up top, we want to take a look at the bus tie switches right here. They should all be in the auto position, and they are. And at this point, we're ready to turn on external power. So we'll go ahead and activate external power 1. Now, it's not necessary to turn on external power 2. I've actually had a scenario where when that gets turned on in another particular aircraft, specifically the 400M, that affects your ability to open up cargo doors. Can't really articulate why that is right now, but I know that you only really need external power 1 at this point, so that's all I'm going to turn on. From here, since we are inside the cockpit and doing work, thanks to Doofer 911 and some of the videos that he's put together, typically we want to go ahead and turn on the navigation lights now, and that just lets ground crew and personnel outside the aircraft know that there is somebody on board and the aircraft is likely in the process of being started up. So we've done that. From here, we want to go ahead and get our inertial reference system turned on. So we have 3 redundant systems here for the IRS. I'm going to go ahead and turn those to the nav position. And that will start to initialize. We'll go back down and take a look at the ECAS page. Now, I want to point out on the ECAS page, notice that we've got obviously a bunch of warnings because we're in a process of starting up the aircraft. But the one thing that threw me at first is this page 1. I'm like, well, how do you get to the other pages? Because clearly there's more warnings here than what the ECAS can show us on this page. And there's a very easy solution to that. You can do it using the cancel recall. Now, just to make it simple so we can see it here on the screen, I'm going to take control of the ECAS display by turning on the control panel here on the right CDU. So we turn that on, and now I can take control, the display control, activate that, and now I have the cancel recall option available to me. So if I hit cancel recall, notice it goes to page 2. And here are the additional warnings that we can scan through. If you click cancel recall again, page 3, and then ultimately when I hit cancel recall another time, all the warnings go away. We're just looking at the current status of the aircraft, and we hit cancel recall one more time to go back to page 1 of the warnings. Now, just in case you're not familiar with what I'm controlling here, this is the EFIS control panel. I've taken control of the right EFIS control panel, so if we look up, that's that control panel over here, and these are the buttons that I've taken control of. Now, I primarily do this from the CDU because it's awfully hard to reach over to here. When I'm sitting in a cockpit, the captain's seat in the cockpit, it's a little challenging to work with these buttons. If I'm zoomed in down here, which is, I spend a lot of time looking down here, it's just easier to control those buttons from the CDU. Now, the downside to doing this is you'll notice we have one warning here on the ECAS page. It said EFIS control right. That's a warning that basically says that this control panel, which happens to also include this panel as well, is now disabled, as if it is broken. There's something wrong with it because we've taken control of it down here. So if I interact with any of these buttons up here, well, as it turns out, these buttons actually work. However, this panel has been disabled, and I can show that to you. Of course that one's going to work. Let me go back to where we were here. But this EFIS control panel, if you look here at the map, none of these buttons will work. If you're trying to set range, visibility, the range button is actually working. But if I tried to do weather, right, I get no weather. If I tried to bring on traffic control, I don't get any response here. So it seems like there are parts of this EFIS control panel that will not respond while you have control of the while you have EFIS control down here on the right CDU. So I just wanted to point that out in case you're wondering why some of these knobs don't work when you're using the right CDU to control the page control buttons. So enough about that. So we've done that. I want to go back over here to our ECAS page. We'll go ahead and get off of flight controls, and we'll go to our status page. And this is the next check. We basically want to scan oxygen pressure for the crew, 1840, and passenger, 1830. Now, I haven't found in the documentation what the standard numbers should be for these particular settings, but what I've seen most of the times when I get into the aircraft is in that 1800 range, 1840, 1820 seems to be normal, so this looks good. We also want to take a look at the hydraulic quantity, 1112, 1, basically all almost in one, and this also is normal for most of the startups that I have in the 747 aircraft, so no problems there. Plus, just to point out that if these numbers were in a warning or a dangerous state, they would actually highlight yellow or red if there was a problem with them. So something else to look for. Take a look at our engine oil quantity. This too, numbers are white. Here's our oil quantity here, and they typically fall in the 20-21 range. So those look normal as well. And the checklist I'm working off of is completely based off of the FCOM for the 747-800, and I've taken a lot of the steps out of that document and kind of consolidated them down to a spreadsheet. So if you wanted to see what that checklist looks like, this is it right here. Basically, we just completed this step right here, looking at the ECAS status page, looking at the various oxygen pressure, hydraulic quantity, engine oil quantity. And then these steps here in black are other things that are kind of annotated inside the FCOM as things that you might do in the real world, but there's nothing really for us to do here because we don't have any control over the circuit breakers, and there's really nothing to go searching for as far as emergency equipment on the aircraft. But I just wanted to show you what checklist I'm working from if you were curious about that. So we're going to continue on now. Let me go back here to the main cockpit. Now, for the walk around, they say you could set the parking brake right now if we wanted to check the brake wear. We're not going to do that. But at this point of the startup process, it's a good time to go ahead and get GSX rolling so that we can get catering taken care of and get our fuel service. So we just need to bring up the GSX menu. We're going to request catering first, and that's fine. And then no sooner do I do that and I go right back in, I'm going to request refueling as well. And that just queues it up. Catering's going to come first and refueling's going to come second. And then we're going to continue on with our check. Okay, and now from this point we want to go and look at the overhead console, specifically above the breaker switches. So if we go up there, all we're looking to confirm up here is that all of these guards are closed. Typically from the cold and dark state they would be, and we don't have any of these are lights. These, a little hard to see, these black rectangles. They would have warning indications in them if there was a problem, but everything is set up here correctly. One thing worth noting, according to the FCOM for the 747-800, is it actually recommends that this APU start source be in TR APU battery. I've never enabled that, and basically all that means is that the APU can be started not only from battery but also from external power. I'm just going to leave that set for APU battery. Everything else over here is set normal, towing power off. There's nothing else to be done up here, so that completes our check. And perfect timing as well, because looks like the catering service is here. Go outside and take a look. We can see that the catering trucks have pulled up along the aircraft, and they want us to open up doors 1 and 5 on the right hand side of the aircraft. Okay, so those doors are opening. We're going to continue on and let catering do their business. So at this point, after looking at the overhead maintenance panel, we are ready to start programming our flight management computer. So we'll look down there, go to menu and back to our FMC, and here we want to confirm identification of the aircraft. So we are flying the 747-800. Our AirAC data is current, so no change there, but we do need to initialize our initial reference system with our current position, our current GPS position. So if we go to, and you can see it says right here, enter IRS position. So we want to go to position initialization. Spot check our time, right? 1432 Zulu, 1432 Zulu up here on the display. And from the status page as well, you can confirm 1432, so that's good. So current time, current position. We're just going to click that, put it down here into the scratch pad, and then the set IRS position, we're going to drop it in. Now that activates our primary flight display and our navigation display with our location. On this screen, we also want to drop in the reference to the airport location that we're in, which is Dulles. So we put in the ICAO code for Dulles. That looks pretty good. From here, we want to move on to route. Once again, we're going to put in our origin airport. And now our destination airport. Looks like catering is done. We need to go back and close those doors. Yep, close those doors. So they're going to wrap up, and the fuel truck will be coming up behind them here shortly. After putting in the destination airport, we want to put in our flight number. Today on this United Airlines flight, we're going with flight number 3785. And from here, we want to go to departure arrival. So we want to set up our departure out of Dulles. And our runway assignment, we can listen to ATIS to get this, but before we can hear ATIS from a cold and dark startup, we need to go down to the aft console here, the aft pedestal, and make sure that our radio is set so we can hear it. So we can turn our mic on, activate our audio control for the left channel, and now when I go to ATIS, it will work. I will be able to hear it.
Visibility greater than 20 miles. Sky conditions, few clouds at 5,000. Temperature 18, dew point 6, altimeter 3021, visual runway 30 in use, landing and departing runway 30. See if our aircraft stay direction of flight. All aircraft read back full chart instructions. Advise controller on initial contact you at Whiskey. Dulles Airport information Whiskey 1431 Zulu, wind 311 at 11. Visibility.
Now I go back down to the audio control and turn it off because honestly I don't want to hear air traffic control. We're not going to be flying with air traffic control today, but I did need to be able to hear the ATIS report. And what that told me is that our barometric pressure is 30.21, and that runway 30 is the active runway in use. Now this deviates a little bit from my flight plan, but that's completely not a big deal. If we look at my flight plan, let me just go and grab it here. You can see my flight plan filed using SimBrief, Dulles to JFK. We're going to look at, right down here on the second page, the flight plan called for a departure out of 19 left. We're using the active runway 30, so we'll need to make a slight change. This is not a big deal. We can still follow the same SID that was provided to us. Let's go ahead and go back to our FMC. We've got our Dulles departures list up, and we need to find runway 30, so we need to go to the next page. Here we have runway 30. We'll select that, and then it shows a picture of the runway actually appears on the navigation display. So that's kind of a cool reference. And the number is always at the start of the runway. So this is the direction of the runway, 30 is the start, so we'll be getting on down here to the lower part of the runway. Now we want to pick our SID, which is Jacoby 3. And the transition from the SID is going to be the AGARD waypoint, so we select that as well. From here we want to go back to route, and this is route page 1. You can see 1 of 2. We need to go to page 2. Here is our SID, Jacoby 3, with the transition to AGARD. AGARD is the waypoint, and we continue with our flight plan programming from here. Now let me just make this easier for you to see, since I still have the flight plan up on the screen. case that was too difficult to see. Hold on, we're being interrupted 1 second. So it looks like the refueling truck is here. So this is a good opportunity for us to go ahead and take care of our payload, and then I'll come back and just talk about this again here real briefly because I want to keep GSX going. So we're going back to the menu. We need to do our setup, and the first thing I want to do is payload. Back to the flight plan for just a brief second. On our first page, the number that we're most concerned with is this zero fuel weight. So currently it's at 256.4 or 256,000 kilograms. On our flight plan, we can see we have an estimated zero fuel weight of 261,340. So we're going to drop that number in now. So 261.3. We'll just click that right into zero fuel weight. That's going to auto balance seating and cargo across the aircraft, which is perfect. And we're only at a load level of about half, 54.8%. So that's good information to know. Now we need to go to our fuel as well. If we look outside before I set this, you can see that the fuel truck is already connected up to the aircraft, and there's a little zero indication here on the side of the truck. This number will start to increment as soon as we put in our designated amount of fuel that's required. So if we go back now and program in our block fuel, and we get our block fuel also from the flight plan. So here in the flight plan, we have our planned fuel. Our block fuel is going to be this lower number. So 23.7 or 23.8, I can round up, will be our fuel load. We can go ahead and put that number in and just click the total up here, and we are using kilograms. So that's only 12.5% fuel load, so a very minimal amount of fuel for this particular aircraft. And if we go back outside, you'll see that the truck's already done pumping that fuel onto the plane. It goes really quick, and they're off and out of the way. Alright, so with our fuel on board, we can go back now to our flight management computer and start completing our flight plan. So we'll go back to menu FMC. Where we were just a moment ago, right, we were looking at our departure. We had picked our runway 30. We're using our SID of Jacoby 3 with a transition waypoint of Agard. When we go back to route, it brings us back to page 1 of 2. We're going to go to next page, and we can see that SID of Jacoby 3 with the Agard transition already listed in our route. From here, we want to look at our flight plan for the remainder of the route information. So Agard is the last waypoint, and now we want to do these remaining steps until we run into a star or the runway. In this case, our next waypoint is this Donald waypoint, and it's direct, so there is no route that we're following to get there. We're just going to direct to that particular waypoint. And entering that is pretty easy to do whenever you don't have a specific via way or route. You just go and enter it directly into the 2 for the waypoint. So we put in our Donald waypoint, and you can see it automatically adds in direct for us. And then when we do have a via route, we put that in first. And then our waypoint. And we just continue this process for the remainder of the indicated waypoints and via routes in our flight plan. Now, I've watched some YouTube videos and they say, oh, you know, you don't need to put in the via ways, the routes. You can just put in the waypoints and it'll figure out the route for you automatically. honestly, I've had kind of mixed experience with that. That doesn't always work 100%, so I find it reassuring just to go ahead and drop that information in myself so that I know that it's accurate and I'm not trying to clean up a bunch of route discos or unexpected routing to my destination. So really this is it for my flight plan. We're done at this point. Now what we need to do is work on our arrival. So from here, once we've got our last waypoint put in, from the last waypoint we're direct to JFK to runway 22 left. That's the initial runway assignment that we have. So back to departure arrival, here we have JFK. We're going to pick our arrival. And 22 left is the runway assignment we have currently according to our flight plan. So we're going to stick with that because we're really not sure what that's going to be until we get a little closer to JFK and we can double check the weather as well as the active runway. So we'll select it, and from here we are not using a star. There was no star designated in our flight plan, but we do have a transition, and that transition is from the last waypoint of our flight plan, which was Cameron. So we go ahead and select Cameron, and now we should be good to go. Go back to route. From here, what we can do is actually look at legs, and legs starts to show us what our route looks like. So taking off from runway 30, heading 301 degrees, we're then going to be turning to 320 and waiting on vectors from ATC before we cross our first waypoint of Riggins. Now we're not working with ATC, so we're going to kind of make that up once we're up in the air, and we'll assign ourselves a course heading to Riggins shortly after takeoff. Then we continue on down our flight plan here. We want to make sure we don't have any route discontinuities in this list, so we scroll through the list using next page. Everything looks good. Here was our last waypoint from the regular flight plan, and then the procedure for landing on ILS 22 left takes us through some additional waypoints to get lined up and descend down to the runway. So those all look fine. Last few waypoints, and then we have runway 22 left where we'll be landing. You can see we have some altitude constraints as well as a speed constraint as we reach that last waypoint on arrival for JFK. So all of this looks good, and if you continue on beyond there, you'll see that this information is just for the go around. So if there's something happens and we can't land, we'll climb back up to 500 feet on a course heading of 224. We'll then turn left 189 degrees heading towards the Chant waypoint. Go about 18 nautical miles and enter a hold at Chant, and then wait for guidance back down to JFK should we need to perform the go-around procedure. So all of this looks good and is standard, so we can move on at this point. And let me just go down my checklist here and make sure we didn't miss any steps. Now we still need to put in our performance information. That's really the next step. So now that we've reviewed the legs, we can actually activate this flight plan. So we click the activate, click the execute, and then we're going to go to init reference. Now for payload, recall that we put in our zero fuel weight of 261.3. To recall that here, because in our performance initialization page we need to put that zero fuel weight in again, we could just type it in, or you can just click the button here to recall it. It'll put it down in the scratch pad, and then we just click zero fuel weight again. So that drops the number in. If we look again at our flight plan for our fuel load, we have our alternate fuel requirement to go to our alternate airport in Boston, 5.6 metric tons, and then reserve fuel for an hour of flight at 7.9. This is going to take us to about 13.5 metric tons of fuel for reserves, and that's the number that we're going to drop in. here in our performance and initializations. So 13.5. Put in our cruising altitude, also grabbed from our flight plan of 290. That's 29,000 feet. And the performance index was calculated for us by SimBrief when I prepared the flight plan. Comes in at 185. Cost index, yeah, that's what I said, cost index. This page here is complete. We can go on to thrust limit. We're only half loaded. The weather is pretty decent. It's actually surprisingly warm for the time of year. We are in winter. We're going to do a derated takeoff, number 2, so 90.8% thrust. And then from here, we want to go to our takeoff specs. Today's takeoff is going to be pretty much a standard takeoff using flaps 10. And the other number we need to put in here is our center of gravity based off the load. That was calculated for us based off the distribution of passengers and cargo. That was on the payload page. We can just recall that by clicking this left select button. 22 is the center of gravity percentage, so we click that into place. And here we have our VREFs, right? So V1 135, our rotate speed of 142, and our V2 of 158. To put those on the speed tape, we need to click them and just activate them. That'll put them in that large font. And now that is good to go. At this point, we are pretty much done with programming the flight management computer for this particular flight. We can go back to the legs page, and once the performance data is put in, you can see we start to have our indicated airspeed and our altitude predictions already appearing on the legs display of the flight plan. Back to our checklist. At this point, the first officer, or the captain, I guess, typically I guess the first officer would go out and do walk around. Now, I like this Easy Camera add-on. It's kind of a cool feature. I showed you already that we can actually go outside the aircraft and walk around. And, you know, coming down here was actually really interesting because there's so much detail. Oop, let me get my mouse over here on the right page. There's so much detail that I never noticed before. If you look here at the jetway, this add-on jetway, look at the detail of the air controls, the power controls, air conditioning, the control panel here at the bottom that ground crew might use to move this jetway around. That's just detail that you just don't see or appreciate when you're up in the aircraft and you don't come outside to take a look. So I think that's really cool. I wanted to point that out. So, you know, for walk around, I love that you can actually move about the ground, right? We can take a close-up look of the landing gear. We could actually perform the walk around, right? Look at the instruments on the side of the aircraft that are helping us get our attitude information and indicated airspeed and temperature and all that fun stuff. Lots of tremendous detail. Looks like there's not much room up there in the cargo bay. Anyway, I don't want to waste a lot of time with this. One thing I am noticing though is, look, the turbo fan blades, fan props there have actually stopped rotating, which is cool. Last time I did this, they kind of continued to rotate. Maybe that was just because there was a lot of wind going on at the aircraft. A lot of wind blowing around the aircraft at that time. I believe the weather was a little bit worse. But still really impressive, right, that we can move about the aircraft. So I really do like this Easy Camera add-on. But enough of that. Let's get back to our checklist. At this point, we are almost ready to request boarding of passengers. One thing we want to check, or is a good thing to check, is our environmentals. So if we go to our synoptics page and we look at ECS, our environmental control system, we can see that the temperature on board the aircraft a little warm in back of the cabin, but pretty close to what the master setting is. So we are getting conditioned air from external to the aircraft, not from the APU. So this is more than adequate to have passengers board. So we want to go to the GSX prompt and go ahead and request boarding of passengers. I hate when I do that. One side effect of the Easy Camera add-on and GSX is if you're using your number keys to control cameras, both the Easy Camera add-on and GSX are going to respond to number key presses. That gets a little annoying. I haven't found a way to really work that out yet. So what we're getting up top is I'm being prompted for the number of passengers I can see. So we need to put in a number. Let's do... You can see there I did 125. My views jumped around on me because, again, the number mismatch. I probably need to turn off that enter number of passengers for GSX and just let it auto count. The reason I did that to begin with is because, honestly, GSX takes a long time to board passengers. And while that may be true in real life, we're trying to get through this startup and get this plane in the air. So I don't want to sit around for an hour while 400 passengers board this aircraft. Too much realism. There is a thing, too much realism. We already got our ATIS information, so we've got we received our barometric pressure. This would be a good time to do that, so I'm going to go back to the captain seat here, and we'll go ahead and put in inches of mercury is what we're using, so we'll set 3021 barometric pressure. One too far, back up, 3021. That would seem to align with what the altitude indication is as far as ground level. So that would seem to still be correct. At this point, we don't typically go through the cold and dark startup. Like I'm a pilot. I'm not a pilot. The pilots don't typically get the aircraft in the cold and dark state, so a lot of that stuff we did with the startup of the aircraft is considered a supplementary procedure. And when they come on board the aircraft, typically things are already powered up and ready to go, but they're going to do a number of checks. So the pre-flight procedure for the first officer actually checks a lot of the things that we've already verified. So I'm going to quickly kind of go through that one more time. We'll go back up to the overhead console. Pre-flight checks for the first officer, so he's looking at the electronic engine controls are all set to normal, which they are. Standby power set to auto. Left and right utility for the aircraft, right, that's back in the cabin, is set to on. That is correct. Battery switch is on. We did that. The bus tie switches are all in the auto position. This is correct. Generator control switches, right, are here. They're all in the on position, but the engines are off right now, so you have the off indicator, which is normal. The generator disconnected drive lights would also be illuminated, and they are, and they'll stay that way until the engines are started. And at this point, if it was needed, we could start up the APU. APU is currently off. We're going to hold off on starting it just to conserve on the noise and conserve on fuel usage, so I don't burn up too much of my fuel here on the ground. So we'll skip that step for now. Take a look at the hydraulic demand pump switches. They are all in the off position, and that's what they should be at this particular point. Hydraulic engine pump switches are also in the on position. So here's our engine pump switches. Up Up top here we have the emergency light switch. This is a toggle with a cover guard on it. You just click the guard and that automatically puts the emergency lights into the armed position and turns them on. I should say arms them for use as required. Captain's audio and observer's audio system should both be in the normal. So observer audio normal, captain's audio is normal. Service interphone switch is off. Our fuel exfer main 1 and 4 is in the off position. Fire engine switches should be in. A little hard to see from this angle, but if we go down to a side view from the captain's seat, the fire switches, you can see they are in, or that's out. They should all be in the in position, and they are. So that's fine. Make sure there's no lights, so we don't have any lights indicating that we've discharged any of the fire suppressant. Same with the cargo fire. These should all be off and not illuminated with any warnings. Engine start switches should be in, similar to the fire control knobs that are in the in position. These are also in. I don't want to pull it out because it starts the engine, or starts a rotation of the engine. We don't have any bleed pressure from the APU, so this is not a good time to do that. So they're all in. You could see that from that other angle. So if you look from the other angle, you can click on it, it pulls it out, but they're all up in the in position right now. Fuel jettison, all in the off position. This is normal. Crossfeed valves initially are all in the on position. We'll come back to that in a moment. Something else to talk about there. Engine anti-ice and wing anti-ice down here are all set for auto. That's fine. And I kind of skipped over the fuel pumps. Currently they are all off, which is normal and expected, so the press lights are illuminated, and that is completely normal as well. If we were running the APU, it's worth noting that the aft main 2 pump and the aft main 3 pump press lights would not be lit. They would be off because they automatically get turned on regardless of the position of these buttons when you're running the APU. Moving on, our window heat. Yes, we want to get the window heat activated at this point. We already looked at the windshield wipers are off, and off. That is fine. We don't have a need for any of our landing lights or our navigation lights for taxiing. Our fuel exfer reserve, the guard is closed, so that's in auto. No indication here, right? Ram air turbine should not be lit up, guard's closed. Our center ADC selector should be in the normal position, and it is. Passenger oxygen masks, this should be closed. Don't activate this. This is the button that actually drops the oxygen masks for the passengers. Yaw damper, yes, we want those both to be in the on position. Our cabin altitude control, this is pretty much all automatic and set up in the required positioning from a cold and dark, so there's really no changes here. Nothing's illuminated, everything's in the normal position. Getting down into temperature control. So the cabin was a little hot. Once we turned the APU on, we could back down these temperatures if we wanted to cool off the cabin a little bit. The upper recirculation fans should be on and normal. We do have a warning here for the pack reset. That can be reset just by clicking this button, but right now we don't have any bleed air, so I'm not going to click that yet. And currently the packs are called to be turned on right now, and that's if you had the APU running. If I turn these on, nothing would change because again I don't have any bleed air, so I leave them off at this point. I'll come back to that once I turn the APU on and take control of the cabin air conditioning. Nothing else to change. The left and right isolation are open as they should be. APU engine bleed is set automatically to on, but the APU is off at this point, and then the engine bleed are also set to the on, which is normal, but the engines are off, so they'll be illuminated off as well. We've already turned on the one light that we need, which is the navigation light. That's currently in the on position, so everything is good, and that completes our checks from up here on the airfreight console for the first officer. So we want to drop down to the first officer's seat and continue with his checks, starting with the flight director. So we need to get the flight director turned on. We want to verify the prompts that come up on his primary flight display. So you should see the auto throttle quadrant should be blank. The roll mode should be set to toga, and the pitch mode should also be set to toga. And then we confirm that the FD prompt is up here. Right, that looks good, normal. Now here's where we get into the EFIS control. Recall that the EFIS control on the right hand side, so that's the first officer's EFIS panel, is mostly disabled. So one of the checks on here, you know, if we were to interact with this console, as I've already shown, some of this stuff might work, but most of it is disabled or not going to work. If you had to make a change to check a particular setting, you would have to turn off that right CDU so that the EFIS control is restored back to this right panel. But really there's nothing that I need to change here. It's already in map. Radius is at 20, which is fine for takeoff, and I don't need any other settings to be set for the first officer. So we can move beyond that for now. The first officer does have the oxygen mask, so standard check. Right, to check the oxygen mask, good to go. This is the electronic flight bag, which we're not going to do anything with, unfortunately. That will be another video another time. The controls down here, right, our source selection controls are pretty much all in the correct position to begin with on the first officer side. Pretty much flight director is on the right. Nav, he's using the right FMC. What do they call it? The EFIS ECAS interface unit. The EIU selector should be in auto, along with the IRS is set to auto, and the air data information is set to auto as well. All standard settings. Those are verified. The one check that they do call for over here is on the flight instruments. They want to see that that TCAS is off. Well, I see that TCAS is off over here, indicated on the ECAS page. But if you're looking for it on the navigation display, you're not going to see it at this point unless you turn on this traffic indicator, this TFC button in the middle of the range dial. We'll just make this easy. We'll go back to menu. We'll turn off the control panel for right now. That clears the EFIS control, so now we have access to the control panel. If you click the TFC button for traffic, we get the arc range indicator lines, and now you can see the TCAS off displayed on the navigation display, and that's one of the checks from the FCOM that they want the first officer to do during pre-flight. So that satisfies that check. I'm going to go ahead and turn the control panel back on just so I don't forget about it. We have programmed the flight management computer, so we do have V-speed indications already on the speed tape. You can see V1 135 is already listed here. We want to look at this ground proximity overrides. So we want to make sure that the glide slope inhibit is not illuminated. There's no warnings on it. Our ground proximity flap override, and our gear override, and our terrain override should all be in the off position, so none of them are indicated as being on. We want to confirm the landing gear again is down. It is. Our alternate flap control is off and not armed, and our alternate gear control is also closed. Guards are closed and not armed. First officer at this point, even though we are not taxiing or taking off yet, we can go ahead and put the auto brakes into the rejected takeoff position, so we'll knock that out now. That is a checklist item. And then other checks, right, you can control CRT brightness, so it's a little hard to see these controls if you look up here just above the ECAS display. And if I go down here and look up, it makes it a little easier to see those. You can see we have the upper and lower brightness for these screens and our control. Let me move this one. There we go. All of these should be in normal heading. FMC should be left, so everything is normal there for the first officer. Looks like the passengers have finished boarding, which is good, and we need to go ahead and close the doors. So with boarding complete, we could manually select these doors and close, cargo doors and everything, but it's easy. We just click the close all. So all of our exterior doors will start to close on the aircraft, including the cargo bay doors. And then all the passengers boarded via the jetway, so that door is now closing for us. And then once they're all closed, we can click the arm all. Now all the doors are armed and ready for flight. Back over to the first officer checks. So radios are on, left observer radio, right radio are all on. I'm not turning on the audio controls because again we're not using FTC and I don't need any of that chatter in the cockpit. If I zoom in up here and take a look at this lower ECAS, you can bring up the checklist control. So when I go into checklist, unlike on the Boeing 777, you could directly interact with this screen. In the 747-800, that's not the case. They've changed the control mechanism so that if I click on this screen, the only thing that it's going to impact is what's highlighted in purple. To really control this screen, you have these cursor controls on both the captain's and the first officer side. You can turn that dial and notice it'll move the purple highlight around the page, and then you could select it by clicking this button. Now that's one way to do it, and that's a bit of a chore. It certainly seems easier to interact with the page directly. Well, you can still kind of do that. The only catch is when you're looking at this EFIS control or ECAS control page, you can now roll your mouse on the page, and that does the same thing as spinning this dial by moving the purple highlight around. The one thing that they want you to do in the FCOM is go ahead and click on resets. So once I've got a button that I want to click highlighted, I can then just click anywhere on the page, in fact, and it will activate that button. Move my purple highlight again, and I want to reset all the checklists. And there you go. That's all there is to it. So now you know how to work with the ECAS control page, and we have reset all of our checklists, which is the one step that I just said that I skipped here a moment ago. Really not necessary, but at least you got some additional information. So from here, we'll take a quick spot check of the weather. Let me just make this easier to see. So from the aft pedestal, here's our weather control. A little hard to see at this range. It's already default got the weather buttons pressed, which is fine, and the auto is selected as well, which I want. That way I don't have to work with the tilt control for the weather radar. Plus the conditions are clear outside, so we probably won't see a whole lot on our navigation display. But that's set. And now we want to go to the transponder, so I'm going to back out here. Go ahead and put in a transponder code. Confirm that we are in standby, and we are. A little hard to see. I liked it when it highlighted before and it would tell you where it is, but you can see the little notch here in the button. So we are in standby. And since we're going to be taking off here in a moment, the TCAS has a normal, above, and below. For takeoff, we want to be looking for aircraft based primarily above us. In cruise, we would go to the normal or neutral position for looking in front of us. And then when we start our descent into JFK, we'll go to the below position, looking for aircraft that we might be descending down upon. So we can go ahead and put that in the above position now, just so I don't forget about it. And that completes the first officer pre-flight checks. The captains are very similar. So the captain as well, turn his flight director on, confirm the flight mode enunciator is correct. Flight director is highlighted. If we have any changes to the EFIS control panel, our map range is fine at 10. We're in map mode. If we want to see the TCAS off, we click the TFC. So here's our TCAS off and our ARC range lines added onto the navigation display. We don't need any of these other settings turned on right now. If we wanted weather, we could certainly click the weather and see if there were any weather conditions. Like I said, the weather's pretty clear right now, so we're not going to see anything on this display. No other changes. We already set the barometric pressure. Right here, barometric pressure. We do want to go over to the MCP. Right, that's our mode control panel. We want to set our indicated airspeed for takeoff to match a V2. V2 was 158. We'll dial this back down to 158. Let me just make this a little easier to see. We want to confirm that the auto throttle arm is in the arm position, and it is. Bank limit is set to auto. That's the dial here for heading. The autopilot disengage bar is in the up position. And the heading for our runway today, if you recall, we can actually get that right from the legs page. 301 degrees, so that makes sense. We're on runway 30 for departure. So we want to dial in for a heading to match the heading of the runway. 301. And we're going to come back to altitude because the checklist kind of bounces around here. If we continue with the checklist that's in the FCOM, or the procedures, we want to verify oxygen mask is good. We're not going to be doing anything with the electronic flight bag. Go back and look at our source select buttons, which are the ones over here. For the captain, everything is left, right? Flight director left, navigation FMC is left, the EFIS ECAS auto select is enabled, initial reference IRS is set to auto, and then our air data information is set to auto as well. I kept saying I wanted to say inertial reference system, IRS. Same thing, looking at the navigation display, we can see TCAS off, so that's what we expect to see. The captain also is going to spot check the integrated standby attitude indicator. It's integrated, so it's matching our barometric pressure. Everything looks good. Attitude looks correct. No other indications for approach, so we don't have any glide slope or localizer information on the display, so that is fine. The plus and minus are basically just control the brightness of this particular display. That's all they do. Now we want to look at the controls. Oh, wrong one. Let's go here. It's this one. Here it is, controls. Perfect. So for controls, we want to make sure that the speed brake is in the down position, and it is. Our thrust controls are in the neutral or the idle position, and they are. Our flap is in the up position. This is verified. And again, recall these are the captain's pre-flight procedure checks. Parking brake set. Now we could do that, but I want to point out, notice over here that our brake pressure is just about 0, so we don't have much hydraulic pressure in the brake system, and you can see that we have a warning light here for brake source. So although I could turn on the parking brake now, which is right here, there's really not a lot of pressure to hold the aircraft in place, so I wouldn't certainly rely on it. And that'll change here once we activate the hydraulic system number 4 electrically. But we'll go ahead and we'll set the parking brake right now. Verify that our fuel control switches are in the cutoff position, and they are. These black caps on the fuel control are actually indicator lights. They're not illuminated right now, so that's all you're verifying, is that they are all off, and they are. Stabilizer trim cut out, the guard should be closed, and this is our alternate stabilizer trim controls. If the ones on your flight control or on the flight stick were not working, you could use these as an alternate control point. And the captain then would then check his own audio controls, and recall that I didn't turn any of them on because we're not flying with ATC, so they're all in the off position right now. And at this point, passengers are on board. We are getting ready to push back on the gate here momentarily and start up the engines, and now would be the right time to go ahead and get the APU started up. So we're going to go overhead, go ahead and turn the APU on. Go ahead and hold into the start position here for a second or two, and let the APU initialize. We can monitor the APU startup by going to the status page, and here we have APU exhaust gas temperature N1, and it will start its initialization. Notice we still have a lot of things up here on our ECAS warning page. That is normal at this point. We'll be clearing those up here very shortly. Go back and look at the overhead console. Once the APU is fully initialized, the APU generator becomes available to us. So we can switch over to APU provided power and get off of the external power just by clicking APU generator 1. And we're going to go ahead and activate the second APU power as well. And with the APU running, we also can turn on the bleed air. So here we have our pack reset. We need to clear this error message and go ahead and turn on our packs. You can hear the fans start to get a little bit louder as we get bleed air from the APU into the aircraft. I want to jump back and just take a quick look at the environmental control again. So back to synoptics. Environmental controls. Our master temperature is set for 24, and the aircraft again is still warm in the back, but it's starting to cool off now with the APU running. You can see these temperatures dropping. That is good. From here, now that we've gone to aircraft power, we look at electric, right? We're no longer on external power, we're on APU1, APU2, and the bus tie has separated those two systems so that APU2 is providing bus 3 and 4, APU1 is providing bus 1 and 2. We can go ahead and request disconnect of the external power. Go back to the menu on our CDU, FS actions, ground connections. We'll go ahead and release ground power, and we're going to release the air conditioning unit. So they'll come and cart those away. And at this point, I have call pre-flight checklist in my checklist. So pre-flight checklist. Pre-flight checklist, oxygen tested, 100%, check. Flight instruments, heading 301 degrees. Altimeter 3021, set, check. Parking brake is set, check. Fuel control switches in cutoff position, check. Checklist is complete. We are good to go. Now, if you're flying with air traffic control at this point, you would request your ATC IFR clearance. Again, we're not flying with ATC, so we're skipping that step. We're going to take our put our left CDU onto takeoff reference, and what's called for in the FCOM, I guess the first officer would actually bring up the legs control. I'm not going to do that, only because I want to maintain control over the ECAS display page, and I wouldn't be on legs very long if I set it at this point, so I skip that step. Here the FCOM also goes over verifying settings in the MCP once again. So if we look up here at the MCP, we've already set the V2 speed at 158 for indicated airspeed assignment. Heading is already set to 301. We do want to click the lateral and vertical navigation, get those armed and ready to go for takeoff. And we want to set our initial altitude. Now this is a good time for us to actually take a look at our flight plan via Navigraph. So if I jump out here for just 1 second, here is today's flight plan that we've got programmed in. You can see taking off from Washington, D.C., heading up and over Gaithersburg, over top of Delaware, up over top of New Jersey, slightly to the left of Atlantic City, up out over the water, and then taking our ILS approach down to runway 22 left at JFK. So this is our flight path today, and we can get some additional information specifically about the departure. So we are runway 30, and I want to look at this Jacoby SID, right, our standard instrument departure. A cool feature is I can actually show the chart in an overlay. I love this. This is so cool because it drops the SID, the actual SID Jepson chart on the screen along with the path, and now we can see here pretty clearly, right, runway 30 heading off 301 degrees. We're then going to turn to 320 degrees. How do we know that, right? Well, we can look over here. Let me just get this off the screen. We can look over here for our departure information. So from runway 30, we're going to climb heading 301 degrees to 820 feet, and then we're going to turn right to heading 320 and expect ATC to give us radar vectors to our first waypoint of Riggins. Right? Pretty funny the way these waypoints are named. If you are a Washington Redskins fan, you'll recognize right away some pretty famous names from back when the Redskins used to be the winning Redskins, which they certainly are not these days. But we have famous Redskins, Riggins, Jacoby, and Grimm there in the our waypoint. So that's pretty cool. I like that. So that's it. So we are doing our own ATC. So it says here, the rigging's information to Jacoby and then on to assign transition. To maintain, we're supposed to maintain 3,000 feet and expect clearance to our filed altitude within 10 minutes. So within 10 minutes of departure and being on a course of 320, we're going to turn for the Riggins waypoint, and we are going to clear ourselves for our cruising altitude of 29,000 feet. And we can see we have the various en route altitude. These are the minimum en route altitudes. So 4,500, 6,200, 9,500, 11,800 up to 15,000. So we are going to be pushing towards our cruising altitude, or at least above all of these recommendations as we move towards the Agard waypoint. So pretty cool. Wanted to show you that. So that's our plan. Go back here into the simulator. I need to get my checklist back up on the page. Alright, so exterior doors are closed and locked. We've done that already. Boarding is complete. Now we want to go ahead and get the jetway disconnected. We're getting ready to do pushback. Now, if you forget the jetway, not a big deal. As soon as you request pushback, the grounds crew is actually going to remove the jetway for you. I like to just walk this process myself. We're going to undock the jetway and confirm. And we'll start to see it push away from the aircraft here momentarily. So there it goes. So I know that that's done. As we are preparing to request pushback, last couple little things we want to get started, and the hydraulic system. We need to put hydraulic pump 1 and 4 into the aux position, and basically what that does for us is turns those pumps on now so that we have hydraulic pressure primarily in the brake system. You can see that. We go back down to, you can see hydraulic pressure is now building and that our warning light has gone out. So this ensures that our parking brake is going to keep us in position, which we're going to become dependent on here in a moment because we're going to ask the grounds crew to pull the wheel chocks away from the aircraft. And then the other pumps, demand pumps, we want to put those in the auto in preparation for engine start. We want to get our fuel pumps turned on. Recall that I said that when the APU is on, that the crest lights on the main 2 aft pump and the main 3 aft pump turn off. Notice the press lights are off. Even though these pumps are not in the on position, they are being used to feed fuel to the APU. So we're going to turn all of these on. And then I wanted to come back and talk briefly about the fuel crossfeed valves. Before I jump ahead, let's just take a quick look at our fuel information. So if we go to our synoptics and look at fuel, we can see that we've got a minimal amount of fuel on board at 23.8 kilograms, and it's pretty much distributed evenly across our fuel tanks. And the FCOM, you would have to read this, but basically what it says is for the overrides and for the crossfeed, we look at the main one and the reserve. So we have 5.9 metric tons and 0 reserves in main 1. And we look to see if that's greater than or equal to main 2, and it is not. And then we do the same thing for main 4. Is it greater than or equal to main 3? And it is not, it's equal. And in that scenario, we do not need cross valve 1 or 4 to be open. There's a lot of details in FCOM, you can read more about it, but that's the long and short of it. So up top here, in what we're actually addressing, I guess I should have pointed this out first, is what we're addressing by looking at this information is there's a warning for fuel tank / engine. Well, we need to address this warning by looking at these numbers and turning off the crossfeed for 1, that's this valve here, and the crossfeed for 4 will resolve this warning message. So back up top, crossfeed 1, crossfeed 4 off, and now we'll see that the warning message fuel tank / engine has gone away, so we've addressed that condition. Alright, we're getting ready to start the engines up here momentarily. We're going to put our beacon light on, both the top beacon and the lower beacon should be on, that's both. We want to set our stabilizer trim. So we have a stabilizer trim reference is right up here on the main ECAS page. You can see it's set currently for 6 right now. And our trim, based off of the information put into the aircraft and our payload, should be 5.9. So we can adjust that from our control stick, 5.9. Aileron trim and rudder trim should both be set to 0. You can tell the aileron trim is set from the captain's seat if you look right at your flight stick. The aileron trim would be represented here by a change in position of this flight stick, and that's what these numbers indicate up top. We're evened out, so it's set for 0. We don't have any trim one direction or the other. And then the other one is over here on the aft pedestal. Rudder trim is set to 0, and that's where that needs to be. So at this point, we are ready for our next checklist. So before start checklist, flight deck door closed and locked. Check. Passenger signs. No, we have not done the passenger signs. So down here to our passenger sign, our seatbelt indicators should have been in the on position. Now they are set correctly. Passenger signs, check. MCP is set with V2 at 158 knots, heading of 301 degrees, altimeter set to 3021, and it's been a little while, so we're going to spot check that again before we get on our way. So that is a check. Takeoff speeds, V1 at 135, V rotate at 142, V2 at 158, that is check. CDU pre-flight is completed. We have programmed the FMC. Trim is 5.9 units with 0 aileron and 0 rudder trim. Check. Taxi and takeoff briefing. Yeah, you know, that's the next thing that I need to work on, to be quite honest, is the briefing process. And wow, that's a lot of information that you could cover. So in short, I'm going to say that our takeoff today is runway 30. Weather outside is clear. Runway is dry. We are taking off using SID Jacoby 3 with a transition to AGUARD. Altimeter is 3021. Transition altitude 18,000 feet. The wind condition I didn't annotate. I don't have that written down here right now. But we'll be checking the weather again here momentarily before takeoff. No NOTAMs, no weather concerns, no other conditions to be aware of. We are doing a D-rated takeoff. Number 2, weight and balance information is received. We are good to go there. Standard flaps takeoff, flaps 10 today. We just covered our V1, VR, V2 speeds. for takeoff, we will be leaving the bleed air on. We will not be using any engine or wing anti-ice. No other noise abatement requirements that I'm aware of. Departure route. We'll be heading out at 301 degrees, climbing to 820 feet, turning right to 320 degrees, waiting on vector guidance to our first waypoint of Riggins. The rejected takeoff is on me. So anything before V1, we come to a stop. After V1, we proceed with takeoff. And there's a lot more detail there, and this is an area that I am completely weak in, and I'm trying to flesh that out. So I've started to put some notes together on that, and that's the best taxi takeoff briefing I have ever given, because it's probably the first one that I've given. So we're gonna go with check. Checklist is complete. Good to go. Back to my regular notes here. Let's get the wheel chocks off the aircraft. It's time. Wheel chocks off. Back to our takeoff information. We want to request pushback. Now, I'm getting one step ahead, and I need to look at, let's bring up so let's take a quick look at moving map. I like this app. I'm having a problem with this app right now because this street map view is no longer working, and I don't know why that is. But here, what's important to look at this now is specifically how am I going to get around the airport. I'm sitting at gate C2, and I need to get to runway 30, which is over here. So it looks like we're going to put the nose to the left, tail to the right, and we're going to taxi down E, taxiway E, hang a left onto Z, and make our way to, it looks like Y, is that Y11? Y11, and then out here straight to runway 30. So that's the plan right now. One thing worth checking is to make sure that I don't have any restrictions on which taxiways that I can travel on. Now this is probably an advanced concept that's a little bit new to me, and we can go back and look at the Navigraph page, and let me just pull up the taxi information for Dulles. So if I go to Dulles, and I'll show you this here in just a second. If we look at, I believe it is, yes, here, I found it. So it's a good thing that we looked at this, right? So if I show you this, so here's the Navigraph presentation of taxiways, and we're looking at the 747-800 taxi routes, and I'm parked here at C2. And C2 is down here. E is not a taxiway that I can use. I'm gonna have to go out to the right here and actually travel down. Looks like J. Yeah, I'm gonna travel down J and then get on F. So J, F to Z, and then from here we hang a left on Z and go down to, looks like, is that Y11, Z to Y11, and then Y11 to runway 30. So we will be doing nose to the right and tail to the left for our pushback. So that's why you kind of want to look at your airport layout or have an idea of what your taxiways are available to you. So glad we did that. Let's go back into the simulator. And now we are ready for pushback. Alright, we'll call for pushback. We said nose right, tail left. No, we're not going to start the engines before pushback.
Hello, Captain. We're ready for pushback.
So I want to go.
Locking gear.
I want to go back in here and set our transponder to the expander position. There's a lot of, basically, if you're at an airport that supports tracking of aircraft on the ground, you want to take it out of standby.
Departure check completed. Bypass pin inserted. Release parking brakes. Commencing push. All engines clear. Start at will.
So we've got clearance to go ahead and start the engines, so we will get in position to do that. Up here to the overhead. Starting engine 4. We're going to pull out on that knob, then go back down and give the engine 4 turn on. We want to bring up our engine display on the lower ECAS. Clicking the wrong button. There we go. Monitor our pushback at the same time. What we watch here, or at least what I watch, is notice the auto start on top of engine 4. We want to wait till this is running, and actually this is a slow start. One thing that I did forget to do is I need to go to the overhead console and turn off 2 packs just so that bleed pressure is available to the engines to assist with startup. That's why that engine took so long to start. Waiting, auto start says running, so that's good. So now we're going to do start engine 1. Engine 1. You can see the auto start indication above engine 1, and that's starting up substantially faster than engine 4 did. Looks like we're back far enough, so I'm going to tell them to go ahead and stop here.
Set parking brakes.
1 is almost started up.
Unlocking gear. Tow truck disconnected. Bypass bin removed.
Alright, so engine 1 is running. We're going to start engine 2 at the 2 and 3 at the same time. Starting engine 2, starting engine 3. Again, auto start above engines 2 and 3.
Left is clear. Right is clear.
Engine 2 and 3 are almost complete with their startup procedure. Engine 2 is running, 3 is running. So now we're all started up. Proceed with our checklist. We've just got a couple things to do. First order of business, we want to turn the APU off since our power and everything in bleed air is now coming from the engines. We want to turn packs 1 and 2 back on. We need to put the demand pump from the electric position to the auto position since we're getting pressure from the engine now. And we got one little hiccup here with generator control 1. We're going to click that off, click that back on to clear that indicator. Looks good. No change required to engine anti-ice. Pack switch is already turned back on. Ground screw totals, the ground equipment is clear. We want to prepare for takeoff, so we want to go to flaps 10. That's flaps 10, and those will start to extend. While we're down here, we want to go to our flight controls. Do a flight control check. Pull left. Pull right. Elevator down. Elevator up. Rudder left. Rudder right. Now this seems like a silly thing to do every single time. I have had it fail. So I make a point of doing it. Now we spot check our DCAS again. We can see that we still have the EFIS control right problem. We're not going to worry about that because we're controlling it down here. TCAS off. We're going to go ahead and put our TCAS system into TA only as we head towards the runway. And we want to get our taxi light switches on. So our runway turn off and taxi lights turned on. Before taxi checklist. And it's just warning us that our EFIS control panel is problematic. Got it, not a problem. Before taxi checklist, anti-ice is off. Recall has been checked. Auto brakes are set for rejected takeoff. flight controls checked. Check. Ground equipment is clear. Board taxi checklist is complete. And we're ready for the fun stuff. First order of business, we're going to release the brake and we're going to start our taxi here to the runway. We need to do a brake check real quick. So as the aircraft starts to move, brake check. Hit the brakes and everything looks pretty good. Now we want to head towards the runway. We need to go to F. So here is I'm going to turn here. So F should be this next right-hand turn. And that's F. Notice the bounce up and down. This is something that Easy Camera add-on, the EZCA or EZdok, brings to the game. Kind of a cool feature. Right, I'm in a giant aircraft driving on a big concrete slab, and you get some feedback from the ground. A cool visual for sure, but kind of annoying if you're up here trying to work with controls and they're bouncing all over the place. That gets to be a little bit annoying. So taxiway F, making our way to Z, where we'll turn left. Watching our speed here and making sure we stay center on the taxiway as well. Trying to do too many things here at once. Get a little wind push against us. To watch our speed. We were up there about 27 knots ground speed. Z should be coming up here. So here we can see Z. We'll make a left on Z. We said we wanted to go to Y11. Y9. So this is going to be Y11 here. going to turn left on Y11. Oh, went a little bit fast there for a turn.
Approaching 30.
Hey, what do you know? This is where we want to be. So we're going to come to a stop here at runway 30 at this threshold. We've got just a couple things we need to do. Primarily get our landing lights turned on. Get our strobe light turned on. Get our TCAS system put into TARA. Double check our checklist here real quick. Weather radar, terrain is all good. We're going to go with, we have takeoff clearance. Heading's going to agree with runway. It will. We are about set. One last thing we're going to do is just notify the cabin crew that we are cleared for takeoff. We're going to start our movement out onto the runway. It looks like there's a little bit of snow on the runway. Visually, at least.
On runway 30.
Get out here and get in position with the heading of the runway. Looks pretty good. We're going to go ahead and get our engines up to about 45%. I'm going to go ahead and click our clock to start our chrono timer. Looks like airspeed's alive. We're going to go to Toga.
Knots.
80 knots.
V1.
V1.
Rotate.
Rotate.
V2. Positive rate of climb.
Gear up. Brakes here a little bit just to stop the wheels. We're already approaching 800. We're going to go to autopilot. Restrict our climb to 3,000 feet. Hold 3,000. We are turning towards 320 degrees and continuing our climb up to 3,000 feet. Now, at this point, we also want to monitor our flap setting. So here we're doing our climb. Looking good. Airspeed is climbing. I want to bring my flaps back in one position. Now, notice that on navigation display that we can't see where Riggins is, so it makes it a little challenging to navigate. But one thing that you can do, and I actually just learned this recently, is there's this center button. So let me go back in on the EPIS panel here. If I click the center button and zoom out just a little bit, you can start to see where your next waypoint is. So we can start our turn right now. So I want to head towards Riggins. So it's within 10 minutes of takeoff. I need to bring my flap in again. And we need to be full open flaps. So flaps fully retracted. I want to start my right-hand turn towards the Riggins waypoint. So if I look down here at my flight management computer, I want to go back to legs and say that we've been cleared for Riggins. No, we're not going to go back to legs. What is this? We want to select Riggins. So it puts it down here in the scratch pad, and we want to drop it in up here for vectors and say execute that. That is correct. That's what we want to do. And now you'll notice that the aircraft is going to start its turn for the Riggins waypoint. We also want to clear us to continue to climb up to our cruising altitude of 29,000. So we're going to get that going as well. Let me just make this a little easier to control. 29,000. We're going to activate it, and now we'll continue our climb above 3,000 feet. Which is perfect. Perfect as far as I'm concerned. How about that? Looking pretty good. Another airport down there. I don't know what airport that is. Alright, so we're looking pretty good. Continuing our climb for our first waypoint. I never did go back and spot check the weather, but I saw it actually pop up on the little notification in the upper left. You may not have noticed that, so I know that my barometric pressure was good. We want to, and the other thing that I didn't do, and you really got to get regimented in the steps that you follow, is we did not do our before takeoff checklist, and we need to do our after takeoff checklist now. So we'll go down here. This is before taxi. We already acknowledged this. Let's go back to this. Our current checklist before takeoff, this was already good, so we're just going to override this. Override is good. Go back to our next checklist. After takeoff, landing gear is up, flaps are retracted, so that checklist is now complete. We can acknowledge that, and our next checklist won't occur until descent, and we don't need that right now, so we'll close that out, and we are good to go. For our navigation display, I want to go back to the standard display. So our radius, Riggins, Jacoby, Grim. Next waypoints, looks like we have some traffic out there off to our right. on our altitude. We are at 10,000 feet, so we can go up and turn off our landing lights, turn off lights, turn off our taxi light as well. Everything else looks fine. I burned up a little fuel getting to the runway, and you might have noticed that the flight management computer was telling us insufficient fuel, and that just means if we look at the progress, I have reserve expectation, I think it was 15.5, and by the time we get to JFK, we're only going to have 14.2 metric tons of fuel remaining, which is less than our reserve. So we're going to continue to get that insufficient fuel warning. See what I mean with the hopping around? A cool effect, but it makes it really annoying to work with your controls inside the aircraft. Weather screen again. I'm going to cheat and just go to active sky and look at our current weather position. 3021, cloudy. Yep. And put our destination back in there. Very cool effect. I love the clouds in this game. The only thing, I've been trying to fine-tune the configuration of FSX to give me better performance. We're still not quite there yet.
Altimeter setting.
My frame rate is still a little on the low side. So we've crossed up through our transition altitude of 18,000 feet, so it's giving us a warning that we want to go to standard barometric pressure. Now we've taken care of that issue. This is a very short flight. We won't be in the air very long before we will start our descent into JFK. And I really wanted to do this flight initially just to get in the 747-800 and take it for a spin. It turned out being quite the process. As I indicated, just working with the flight simulator trying to tweak some of its configurations. I've got the frame rate up a little bit, it's improved, but we're not quite there yet, so I'm going to have to dial back some of the intensity of the graphics or the clouds, one of those things. And while I still have this odd flicker going on in the clouds, you see that little flash of color? I have no idea what that is. It shouldn't be doing that, and I can't put my finger on what's causing that problem. That's one of the last little annoying hiccups that I have in FSX. The other thing that I always forget to do is to release the passengers from their restraints. seatbelts back to auto, the signs will go off automatically 10,000 feet, and I have a tendency to forget that. We also want to keep an eye on our heading indicator. Make sure we're keeping that aligned with our direction of flight. We're almost up to our cruising altitude. So this was probably a good time. We're getting ready to hit 29,000 feet. In fact, we're pulling into it right now. The only change that I need to make is now that we're cruising altitude, recall that for TCAS, we want to put this back into normal or neutral position so that we can look for aircraft in front of us. Beyond that, we are in cruise until we start our descent down to JFK, which really will not be long at all. And I'll be back to complete that part of the procedure here in a moment. But I want to say we're going to stop the video at this point. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you watching that cold and dark startup of the 747-800, getting the flight management computer set up to go to JFK. I'm Liam Locke. This is Liam Locke Gaming, and if you like this video, please click the thumbs up. I do appreciate it. And if you want to continue to see more of these videos, I hope that you'll subscribe. I plan to do a lot more, and I've got a really good flight lined up next. Challenging flight because all of my friends are trying to make me crash. That's their goal. But thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.